extremist, an aesthetic voyager whose home is the road.
That was a scene from the 2007 movie Into the Wild, based on the wilderness adventures of the late Chris McCandless. 2 decades after his fatal journey, his sister Corinne decided it was time to reveal the parts of her brother's story that have never been told. She's out with the new book, The Wild Truth, and Corinne joins us now. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
That was an incredible story, and yet you feel the need to set the record straight. So why don't we start there? Because there's some, what would you say, inaccuracies, misunderstandings, or?
Misunderstandings. I mean, John Krakauer wrote an absolutely stellar book in Into the Wild, and a lot of the information that wasn't in that book is my fault. I take responsibility for that, because there are a lot of things that I told John that I wanted him to understand Chris, but it's not something that I was ready to share with the rest of the world. And, you know, Chris's story is a very powerful symbol of the devastating effects that domestic violence can have on children, and that is a misconception that people don't understand.
So let's get to that, because that was always the big hole in the story. I mean, you can understand, you know, a young guy, you know, want to go off to the wilderness, you know, to experience nature, to be with himself or of himself, but the lack of communication with your family. So what happened? Why did he leave? What was the driving factor in forcing him into the wilderness?
Well, it's good that you use that word forced, because really that's it. I mean, there is a misconception sometimes that people don't understand it's a lot more than just some ill-fated Jack London fantasy. I mean, Chris's love for nature certainly was why he chose to go in that direction, and where he chose to kind of go through his own recovery from what we went through in our childhood.
What did you go through?
Well, domestic violence, and I think that people don't understand oftentimes that domestic violence in all forms, whether it be physical, whether it be psychological, whether it be emotional, it's this trauma that exists.
And what was it in this case?
The precipitator?
My father, especially, as far as the physical standpoints of violence, but you know, my mother was his primary victim, but unfortunately she wasn't strong enough to get herself or us out of the situation, and she went from being a victim to an accomplice, and it's a very unfortunate situation. And I understand why people suffer in silence. It took me 20 years to write this book, and I get it. And I'm really hoping that this book helps other people find their voice.
John Meacham?
What was the why after 20 years? Was there something in your own life that led you to this particular time to tell the story? Several
things. First and foremost, probably becoming a mother. And understanding the importance of priority, and understanding how important truth is. I have a special needs child, and I want her to feel empowered, and I know that the absolute best thing to do that for is just to be very open and honest and have a very positive home environment at all times. But I also have been working with students as a lecturer, and Into the Wild is required reading at thousands of high schools and colleges across the country.
Yes, your daughter wrote about it.
Yeah, and it's very powerful, and I've seen that connection. But when I go and share the rest of our story, and by telling my story, I'm filling in the blanks of Chris's story, that becomes not just an assignment for these students anymore, but it becomes a lesson that they really take with them outside of the classroom. And for years, as I've been doing this work, I've seen the incredible impact that it has and the difference that it makes, and I just knew that I had something important to share, and I knew that it was time to do that.
Corinne, just curious, during your time of spending 20 years waiting to do this, but also the exploration that it takes personally to invest in doing this book, you write that Chris was your protector as a kid, going through a lot of these violent situations. So do you harbor any anger toward your brother for leaving, and then also now leaving you later in life? And if so, did you find forgiveness in this journey of putting this book together for what your relationship with your brother is, and where this takes you now moving forward with what that relationship means and what it means to your life today?
I can honestly say that I never was upset with Chris. I was never angry at all towards him. I completely understood why he had to leave. I completely understood, you know, after learning of his death, which was devastating. It was like telling me there wasn't going to be oxygen in the air the next day, that Chris would be gone. I never thought Chris would find himself in a situation that he couldn't get through. And I just think that it's sometimes difficult for people to understand, but I get it. You know, Chris and I had this connection, and I understood why he needed to go, and I loved him enough to deal with the not knowing where he was, and I knew that I would see him again. And I have a very strong faith, and my brother had a strong faith, and you know, I believe he's still with me. I believe he was with me during the process. I wrote this book with a focus on truth and with pure intent in my heart, and you know, Chris taught me that that's what's most important.
Your life growing up, your life with your brother, your love for your brother, your family, and what your family experienced. Was there a point in time, is there now a point in time when you think parts of it or all of it were your fault? Were you able to get over that feeling?
If you did.
As far as when we were little kids, well, when we were children, we were told that this was our fault.
Yeah.
That the tumultuous things that were happening, and Chris was 3 years older than me, so he really took that on, and that's a lot of pressure to put on the shoulders of a little boy. But a lot of people don't understand, and that's part of filling in the blanks of the story. I'm the youngest of 8 children. So, you know, we had 6 other brothers and sisters from my father's wife, Marcia, and my mother was his mistress, and all of our ages are intermixed. And my mother became Walt's second wife. But you know, it's a very, it took a long time to really understand all of that, because when you're a young child, you don't know what it means that you have one brother that's 3 months older than your brother Chris from another.
I think you could take a lifetime trying to unwind that.
It takes about 20 years.
Yeah. Okay.
And then some solid chapters to lay it out to everybody. But you know, it's part of the mystery, and it answers a lot of the lingering why questions as to what drove Chris to such
So many
extremes.
kids are being forced to think about themselves, forced in a really good way, being challenged is a better word, because of Chris's story. My daughter wrote an essay. The question was, would you ever do it? And her answer I read when I was on a cross-country flight. I was going through her summer reading essays and thinking about her college applications. I was crying the whole way to where I was going. And it was the most revealing answer from a kid who doesn't really open up. So it's amazing. The story sparks the imagination and the soul a little bit.
You know, I think it's also about understanding the difference between selfishness and self-awareness.
Yeah.
You know, Chris was extremely self-aware.
Yes.
And his actions might look, and sometimes people think he was selfish, but he was far from that. And I think that it's so important in the work that I do with education. I see with these students, it's getting them to, you know, they're at this age of opportunity where they're deciding who they're going to be, and they're laying that foundation for who they're going to become. So I think that this book is very important for so many ages. Yeah.
The book is The Wild Truth. Corinne McCandless, thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
Still ahead, one of the great writers of his generation, horror legend Stephen King, will join us on set.